Welcome to this episode of GovCon Coffee and Issues. Today, we're going to talk about planning and the process of annual planning in particular. And Michael, I know you've done quite a lot of work in this area. I try to do my best at planning and usually carve out some time at the end of the year to do some planning and then work to meet with the team to discuss the plan for the year. And it seems like it's always challenging sometimes to just kind of make time for it to begin with. I think that's kind of maybe one challenge to start out with, is just to really understand the importance of planning your year and then allocating that time out. And you want to talk about some of the work that you do in that? Because I know you guys had a planning session towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle is exactly what you just mentioned there, is actually making sure it goes on the calendar in regular intervals. And most people don't plan at all. And I think if you're in that situation, just adding one planning session a year is going to help. Ideally, you want to have 4. You want to have quarterly planning sessions. And one of those is your annual, where you're reviewing everything that's happened. You're taking a look at the year that's coming up. And you do this well in advance of the end of the year, however your business operates. Most people, even if you operate on a fiscal year, you still do planning on a calendar year. A lot of times, that's just what makes sense to people. So I recommend somewhere in mid to early November is a really good time to do that annual planning, because it's just enough time that you can go through, you can sit down with your team, your people, and go through your goals, your action items, the big things you want to accomplish. And then you have enough time between that early to mid-November and January 1 to actually put some of those things in place. So that's what I normally recommend. But then as you start going, it's really, really critical to not wait to the end of the year to do a review. Think about, like, if you were on a cross-country trip and you were leaving New York with the goal of getting to California, and you just started driving and you're taking roads and doing different things, but you're not really paying attention, and you don't check in until you realize, hey, this starts to look like Florida, right? You're way off track by that point. And so in your business, why wait to the end of the year to check in on your goals, to check in on the challenges and things like that? So doing a check-in every quarter is my minimum advice on that. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. I think that's what a lot of people look at planning and say, well, we need a 12-page document and 35 different bullet points to cover and all of this. Your initial meeting could simply be to sit down and say, where are we taking the company? Like, what is our vision for the company? What is the main thing we want to sell? Who do we want to sell to? What are our goals, personal and business, here that we want to focus on? It could be a handful of things that you're focused on, and those will drive the rest of the meeting. And in fact, you should be focused on, what are our goals? I see that a lot of times where people don't have a lot of meaningful goals. It's more focused on, well, I think we need to win more contracts. Okay, well, do you? I think we need to hit a certain revenue goal. Well, do you? Because to me, it's not about revenue. It's about profit, not about how much you make, how much you keep, right? That's the really important thing. And so it's really easy to get romanced by metrics that don't matter to you. So like your first planning session, when you sit down with your, whether it's business partner or, your executive team, or even if it's a mission of one where it's just you, right? To sit down and say, what are my goals? Where am I focused on? What am I going to accomplish in the next 12 months? That's a really good starting point, so that you can then say, well, how am I going to accomplish these goals? What things do I need in place? What resources, what people, what processes, what do I need to put in place in order to accomplish that? What are the obstacles? Oh, I don't have cash, so I can't hire somebody. Or, oh, we have this product delay and, my product's not going to be ready till the second or third quarter. So that's going to impact revenue, right? And so when you start with the goals and you start filtering that down, it just makes the whole process easier to me. And I think when you walk away from a planning session, you should have a handful of action items. Like, hey, here are the things that we're now going to do, not just the goals we created, because that's really where the rubber meets the road, right? If you walk away from a planning session and you've just had good conversations and you're like, we're going to be a $20 million company next year, but you don't have the how, you don't have those steps of, well, if we're going to be a $20 million company, how many contracts do we need to win? At what average size? How many RFPs does that mean we're going to have to submit? Because, our win rate's only 20%. And at 20%, we need to fill out this many to win this many and those kind of things. Those things filter out from the goals. And so if you're doing the session right, you will walk away with a list of action items that will help guide you towards accomplishing what you need to. And again, that's not complicated. So don't overcomplicate. That's probably my soapbox for planning sessions.
No, that's great. And don't overcomplicate it, and also keep it simple and keep it realistic. And, we've all heard about the acronym SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. But I resonate with something that you just said, because it's something that I've run myself into in the past. And I did it several years, where I would get at the end of the year, I'd go to some conference and get all fired up about what we're going to do next year. Then I come back to the team and I'm like, hey, we're going to do $20 million next year, just like you said. And although I didn't put 20 million, maybe I said a million, but nonetheless, at the point in time that I would say that is a super stretch goal. And what I really was not taking into account was the realism of it. And not to say that it's not possible. I think that all things are possible, but it's what burden is that going to place on your team that you have? What areas are you going to have to sacrifice to buy yourself some time to do the things that you got to do to get there? And so in the process, what would happen with me in the past, and where I was messing this up, is that when I would do that, I would get like 3 months in and I'm like, all right, this is not realistic. And then I didn't have a backup plan B to say, like, I'm going to do this now. This is realistic. But now I come in with a lot more realistic goals, and that way my wife's not divorcing me, since she's a partner in the business with me. And
right.
So
Which that's really important, right? At least to some people, that may not be important. Maybe lower on their goal. Your goal is to stay married. That's one of your top goals, right?
Right.
Where so what I see a lot of times is people start off trying to chase a goal. And when I was with Tony Robbins, he would always talk about how people tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, but underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. And so you'd see these really just wacky goals where it's like, we're going to be a $5 million company by the end of the year. And by the end of 10 years, we're going to be an $8 million company. Like, so how could you be 5 in 1 year, but you're only going to grow a small percentage over the next 9 years? Like, how does that work? Right.
Yeah.
Because of the way our minds work, it tries to, one, overcomplicate it, but like overachieve some of this stuff. But then what you said was really important. There are sacrifices that have to be made in order to achieve certain things. It's just the way it is, right? And you could take your company from 0 to $10 million in 1 year. It's been done numerous times, but there are sacrifices that have to be made. Some of those are with family, friends, hobbies, all those other kind of things. Some of those are financial. You'll see people that are in a massive growth curve who are eating ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because they're like, look, I don't have any money because it's all going into the business. And then there are other people that are like, look, I don't want to eat ramen because I either don't like it or I'm sick of it. And I'm past that stage in my life and I'm not willing to make that sacrifice. So I would rather grow slower and have some steak once a week than do that. I'd rather see my kids in their ball game or whatever. When Josh and I started, it was whatever, whenever, right? Like you just work around the clock if you need to. And then we got to a point where it's like, hey, can you work this evening? No, I've got karate. I've got this, I've got that. And it's like, we're making enough money that we only want to make a certain amount of sacrifices. And so like, it really is about the sacrifices that you have to make to achieve a goal and make it realistic. Because like you said, everything is achievable depending on what you're willing to give up. Am I willing to give up watching Netflix the next few weeks to finish writing my book? I did that over Christmas, right? So I'm just finishing up a new book. It'll be out in March. And one of the things that I did was, even though I had all that downtime, I take 2 weeks of vacation. Every single day I was writing in the book. Instead of going off and doing anything, I was like, I want to get this done. And so I wrote 26 out of 31 chapters over the Christmas break. Because I like, that's the sacrifice I want to make, because I want to hit this deadline so that the book can come out on this date so I can have it for this conference and these other things. But it's a sacrifice I was willing to make, where somebody else may say, I'd rather just take another year and I'll just push that goal out. Because that's another thing that happens with our goals is, let's say you found it unrealistic to hit the $1 million in your first year. A lot of people just say, well, let's just give up and let's set a new goal, right? Let's set a new goal. Let's set a new goal of $500,000 because maybe that's realistic. And they start going towards that and they find that to be unrealistic and they just set a new goal. So they wind up in a cycle of setting new goals and never actually achieving them. Instead of saying, okay, well, we missed the deadline on the $1 million, so I'm just going to move it a month. Would that give us enough time to hit the $1 million in revenue, or to get up to the $83,333 a month that is required to be on track to running $1 million business? We're just going to move that portion of the goal, but we're still keeping the goal of $1 million business. And so that's why I think it's so important to do these check-ins once a quarter instead of getting 6 or 8 months in, because you can get spun up at a conference. A conference will get people wound up on how they can climb Mount Everest. And I just saw a meme the other day that said something along the lines of, the Mount Everest is littered with bodies of people that were once really excited about the venture. So maybe just calm down, buddy. Calm down a little bit. But like, we get super excited at a conference and we come back and we think we can do all these things, and those things are not in our plan. So we got to figure out how to work them into our plan so it doesn't take us off course and we're still on track to achieve the financial goals that we're trying, or whatever other goals we have. Because I think when you look at the goals for the business, it's easy to say, well, it's just financial. And my goals are not always like that. So, my goals for this year was not just to hit a certain revenue mark. It was to put 2 books out. So one of those books is coming out in March. One of those is coming out late in the fall, and I'm on track to do that. But those are some of my goals, because I know putting out books helps us grow. And so it's like, what other things that are major milestone goals for us in our business, like speaking at certain conferences? My goal was to speak at 4 different conferences this year. I've already been booked to speak at 4 conferences for the year. So what other goals? And they're all things that relate to the growth and help our exposure, but they contribute, instead of just saying, well, our only goal is $1 million. Well, there's other things you need to do to achieve the $1 million.
Yeah, and that's actually where we came in this year, where I was like, I don't even really want to set necessarily a revenue goal, but a service goal. It's like, how do we be of more service to our current and existing customers? And then maybe beyond that, we do some things as well. But first, I want to go back and focus on our most loyal customers. And I think a lot of times when we were talking about sacrifice, that's another area where it's like, hey, if you're chasing a dollar sign, you're maybe going to sacrifice over here on this side of the front with good customers that you've already got that also can be a part of a bigger plan going forward. I wanted to shift a little bit and talk some specifics about maybe what would be unique to government contractors. And there's a couple of things that right off comes to my mind, Michael. And one thing, of course, is that, first of all, if you're going to be a federal contractor, you should understand the cycles of the government inside of their budget year, which, of course, begins in October 1st and ends in September 30th of each year. Because each of those years, there could be different things happening where, like at the early parts of the year, if they get into that situation where there's a continual resolution, they've got no money, and then all of a sudden maybe they get to Q3 and it's like they get all their money and then some. And then there's this massive spending spree towards like the 3rd and the 4th quarters with the government. And so I think that that's one consideration to take into account. But there's some other considerations, and I want to come back to those. But do you have anything in particular that you usually will kind of give tips or strategies for your contractors on that you guys work with on the budget cycle and certain things and activities to be doing in certain parts of the year.
Yeah, I think looking at the data is always really helpful. So pulling that propensity data once or twice a year, where you're looking at who buys what you sell, how they buy what you sell, when they buy what you sell, all of that kind of stuff is really helpful to notice if there's any shifts. That's one thing, because I've noticed almost every time I pull data on for clients, I will see that there is a cycle of when their buyers are buying. It's almost every single time. And sometimes it is a gradual thing. And sometimes it's a massive difference where, like, man, 80% of the spend for what you are selling happens in Q1 or whatever quarter, right? You'll see those different trends. So identifying those trends, I think is usually like a once or twice a year thing. We're looking at those. But for the most part with clients, I zero in on stuff that is, it's almost agnostic around like the sales process and things like that. And I do get into the government side more on like the metrics, because people tend to be very lax about the metrics. And when I say the metrics, it's stuff I was mentioning earlier of understanding what their numbers are. What is your win rate? Not your P win, because your P win has nothing to do with your overall conversion rate. Your P win is your probability of winning a contract. That's what it is. And it's different based on every contract you look at. Some it's going to be 0, some it's going to be 95 or whatever. But your conversion rate is for every RFP we submit, how many do we win? And there's a percentage there, right? So, for example, if I submit 10 and I win one, that's a 10% conversion rate. So understanding what your metric is there is helpful, because if you don't know it, you can't improve it. And if you don't know it, you won't put enough opportunities in your pipeline. And it's one of those things that is rarely static in a business. So a lot of times a business looks at that and says, well, we normally win 10% of our opportunities. I'm like, that was in 2021. I looked at 2022 and you were only winning 6%. What happened? Oh, well, there's a couple of things that might have happened. Let's take a look at the opportunities you responded to. Oh, you started responding to things that were outside your target agency. Oh, you started responding to things that you didn't have past performance for. Oh, you started responding to things that were well outside the size and scope you should be chasing. And now your winning percentage dropped from 10 to 6%. Now you've got to put out that many more RFPs. I had a client recently that I was doing an annual planning session for, and we sat down and I said, do you have enough opportunities in your pipeline? And like, yeah, we want to hit $4.5 million this year, and we have $4.5 million in the pipeline. Like, so you're going to win every one of those? Well, no. Like, okay, I'm waiting on you for the light bulb here to come on because you think you have enough in your pipeline and you don't. And it took them a minute for it to click and go, oh, we're probably only going to win 10%. Oh, 10% of that's $450,000. So we need to start adding opportunities to pipeline, don't we? And so we did the math. And I think they went from having to chase 10 RFPs on the year to somewhere in the neighborhood of 46. That's a massive jump. I'm like, you guys have got to start working a lot harder because you're not putting enough in. You're not going to be anywhere near your goal. And so understanding what those simple metrics are allow people to decide how they're going to allocate resources. Do we have enough people to respond to 46 RFPs this year? Or do we need to hire a new, whether it is a proposal manager or a writer or whatever it is? If we're going to respond to that and we're going to win that, do we have the employee pipeline built of potential candidates to fill those butts and seats, if that's the kind of work we're doing, right? So understanding those things allow you to start going down the rabbit hole of tasks to say, well, if we're going to win that, and we are, because we're going to make this happen, we had better start building our employee database. We got to start recruiting, because we're going to have to staff a lot of people. Oh, if we're going to do that, man, by Q2, we are going to need to bring that proposal writer on, because we're just going to have so much work by that point. We're going to need to, and so you can see where I'm going with this, where as you start to look at the numbers, it can help you define that. And then now you've got a better plan of attack and know what you need to be doing. And at the end of the day, it's about holding yourself accountable to be hitting those numbers. Because a goal is really interesting. If you look at like a math equation, I equate a goal to the thing that's right of the equal sign, right? It's the result of work that's been done. And people are really good at identifying the things that are right of the equal sign and really poor at identifying the things that are left. So, what plus what or what times what gives you the goal? And we can get the goal easy, but identifying all those things left of the equal sign and then doing them is where a lot of the contractors struggle because they're like, oh, I've responded to a couple of things on Sam, and now I'm just twiddling my thumbs waiting for the next one. It's like, no, there's a lot of activity that needs to happen to make it there. So I could soapbox on all the day, so I'll just shut up. So.
Well, just to kind of piggyback on something you mentioned with regards to, if you would take the example of the person that you talked about, was it like $4.5 million was the goal?
Yeah.
And they had only certain amount of opportunities in their pipeline. So there's two ways you can go about it, which is increase the number of things that you're going after, or you can work to increase your win rate on those opportunities.
Exactly.
So maybe if you're only doing 10% right now, by the way, I read a study. This was probably like 10 years ago or more. And anyway, the study said that of the contractors polled, active contractors registered in SAM, that the average win rate was about 40%. Now, I'm not sure how accurate that was or whatnot, but it kind of got me to thinking, right? So this might be a good metric to see how well you're doing as a contractor. And if maybe you're not winning at least 40% of the opportunities, there's room for improvement. And where do you get that improvement? I know that a lot of webinars that Josh does, your partner, Michael, of course, for the people that don't know Michael, that Josh is your partner, you know that, but that's why a lot of the folks love the training that Josh does on the platform, because he talks a lot about strategies and tactics, the pre-acquisition work. And a lot of that pre-acquisition work really helps to increase your win rate to the point to where some contractors really have a 70 or 80 or 90% win rate. And that's kind of sounds unheard of. But when you get to the right positions in the marketplace, and especially once you start winning contracts, your win rates on recompetes will become a lot higher. And there's just a lot that you'll have going for you. And, I often say, because a lot of times if you were to survey a group of contractors and what kind of training do you want this year, a lot of people will talk about the proposal writing training. But in my view, the proposal writing is really, it's the paperwork part. It's just the formalization of getting the job. 100%. Whereas all of the pre-work, if that work has not been done, your win rate is going to be pretty low in the competition. Yeah. So that's just some food for thought for those that are looking to maybe improve their win rate by maybe not having to bid on 10 times the number of opportunities, because there might not even be 10 times the number of opportunities to bid, but focus on developing that win rate.
Right. You're 100% correct. And what I often see with the people that have really low win rates is it's not usually about their proposal writing. Their proposal writing is usually on par or close to everybody else. Sometimes it's the pricing. That's a piece of it. And it's the pricing that's way out of whack. But more often than not, it's because their filter is so wide. They almost don't have a filter on what they're responding to. So on Monday, I'm responding to a cybersecurity contract. On Tuesday, I'm responding to something in janitorial. On Wednesday, I'm responding to something in medical supplies or something like that. And I know there's people listening today saying I'm crazy that people don't do that. You would be shocked at how often I see that. And then it goes to another layer of they're not even looking at remotely at the same agency. So it's DHS today, it's Army tomorrow, it's HHS, it's CDC. They're bouncing all over. And all of those people are hearing from you once and then never again. and you don't know anything about them. They don't know anything about you. But when you start to create a filter and you're focused on one agency, I know a lot of people say 3 to 5. Initially, when I'm talking to people, it's one agency. And we need to learn that agency like it's a brand new relationship. And you're trying to understand from the top down how they work, how they do business, how they buy what you sell. And it's the flagship product or service you sell. It's one thing, not 15 things. Like, yes, you can do custom computer programming, you can do cybersecurity, you can do app development, you can do SharePoint, you can do Oracle, AWS, you can do all of that. But what is your flagship? Because it's so hard to go from an RFP that is AWS cloud services to an app development to a cybersecurity thing. You have to have different technical writers and different expertise. Either that or you're doing all of that and shifting gears. But if you're doing the same thing, you can get really, really good at it. And that's where I find a lot of people that have those really low conversion rates are the people that they're all over the board. There's no filter. If it is in their realm of capability, because in junior high, I mowed lawns all summer for, a lawn care company, so we can do landscaping, even though we're a cybersecurity business. We're chasing that RFP. I had a client call me out of Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago. Guy does, buckle up for this one, right? He does program management. He has a gun store and he does dumpsters. So like he'll like drop the dumpster in your yard and you just fill it up and then he'll come get it and throw it away. So those are 3 things that he sells. And he was trying to figure out how to sell all 3 to the government. It's like, I want to sell shotguns to the government. I want to sell program management and I want to sell dumpsters. I'm like, your day is going to be really hard. Like searching for like, who do you sell to and all that, like the amount of things. So I'm like, let's zero in on the program management because that's the best one of those 3, right? You're not going to be super competitive in shotguns because there's other people who've been selling shotguns a lot longer than you and you're brand new in the business. But we can squeeze you in this program management side because there's so much of it. There's so much of it, right? And so again, it's the being able to find some clarity and say, this is my flagship. This is my flagship agency. For this guy also, I was like, what is it in your past? Like, who have you been working with? I believe him, it was FAA. I'm like, okay, well, let's look at FAA opportunities in program and project management. Instead of saying, let's go learn how to speak a new language and sell to the CDC. Like, you don't know anything about CDC. Let's stick with what you know, which is FAA stuff, right? Because if you just create another learning curve in your life of, well, I don't know anything about CDC, or I don't know anything about the Army, or I don't know anything about the FBI or whatever, like it's a learning curve that's unnecessary in your growth. So you just eliminate that stuff by focusing on one product, one service, one agency, and drill down and get really good at it. And then you can expand down the road. But that's where I see a lot of people with their plan. It's like, let's just sell anything to anybody, right? That's almost that middleman strategy you see a lot of times.
Yeah.
Well, let's just get on there and let's go all war dog style on this and just start responding to things. And once we get a win, then we'll figure out how to sell it, how to provide it, whatever you want to call it. So.
Yeah, and that's oftentimes a recipe for disaster. I had a client back in my PTech counselor days that did that. And he was selling totally separate service in language translations and stuff like that. Then he comes back from a vacation and all of a sudden he has a large IDIQ contract with the VA to do landscaping in Kentucky. And we're living in Washington State. We tried to convince him, you probably should ask to get out of that contract because it's going to be a disaster. And sure enough, it was because he really didn't have the planning right for understanding what goes into landscaping, especially in a out-of-state contract. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing where you could really get yourself in a lot of trouble with that, especially if you're coming into government contracting, because everything that you sell has a different compliance element around it. Mm-hmm. For example, if you are selling products, okay, there's the non-manufacturing rule that comes into play, probably Trade Agreements Act. If you're shipping something overseas, it's got to be on a U.S. flagged vessel. It's got to be in the right packaging, the whole 9 yards. And so what happens a lot of times when people watch YouTube superstars and
Yeah.
like, hey, just find something to sell. They get themselves in trouble because they don't take into account there's these all of these intricate compliance items that's attached to that. And you've got
Yeah.
other competitors who specialize in doing that and meeting all the compliance standards. And so this is where winning a contract might be the worst thing that could happen, because your first contract in that situation could be your last.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I ever told you about this guy. It was one of the first consultations I did in this business. This guy calls me up and man, he was super excited and stressed out. And he's like, Mike, I just won the $65,000 contract for the VA for toilet paper. I'm like, okay, cool, man. What's the problem? He's like, I don't know anything about toilet paper. I'm like, so how did you win? That was a question. And I'm not kidding. He said, I went on the like Walmart
Website. Oh,
Sam's
okay.
Club. I
Yeah.
went on the Sam's Club website and saw what toilet paper was on there and figured I could probably get a discount if I bought it in bulk. And I just marked it down 10% from the Sam's Club website. He's like, but then I contacted Sam's Club for the $65,000 in toilet paper. And they were like, number one, we're not giving you a discount. Number two, we can't ship $65,000 worth of toilet paper in the required time because he'd been screwing around.
Right. Right.
He had 2 weeks left to deliver this toilet paper, and they were like, we can't ship that much toilet paper in 15 days. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And he wound up begging basically to get out of the contract. He did, and he never won a contract again because they were like, you had the best price. Because I don't know what the normal price is on that kind of stuff, but he had a great price, and he totally screwed himself over from ever doing business with him because the government was like, literally, this is the first contract we gave you, and you messed it up. And he did it. He's like, I messed up, and here's why. And it's good to be honest and all that, but it's like you shouldn't have taken it. Like you didn't understand it, and somebody had just said, go win it. And more power to people who are out there trying to figure things out and make mistakes. I highly encourage that, but there's certain things you don't do, and you don't make promises that you have no way to keep. And that was one of those. He had no way to keep that. Like I would have, at least before I submitted that quote, reached out to Walmart or Sam's, asked them about pricing, things like that, delivery times. I would have covered those bases and then submitted my quote. And that would have been one way to do it. Or Googled, hey, toilet paper suppliers, and tried to find a supplier and see if I could get that done, and then submitted my quote. That strategy just doesn't work of go win it and then figure it out when you don't have any background. I'm always telling people, like, what do you know? Like, what do you know about? Whether it's a hobby or the job you've had for the last decade, what do you actually know about? Because the learning curve is so much smaller on something you understand than if you are a program manager and you decide to get into products that are shipping internationally. I had this call yesterday. You would have loved this one. These guys called me up and they were like, we've got this connection, right? And that's always how these weird ones start. We've got this connection to Saudi Arabia, and we can get millions of barrels of oil, and we want to sell that to the government. And I'm like, have you ever done this before? No. Have you ever sold oil to anyone before? No. What do you know about oil? Nothing. But we can get millions of barrels of it at a really good rate. So how do we make money doing this? And I'm like, you talk to somebody else because I can't help you. Right. Right. Because they're like, we're talking shipping containers of oil. Yeah. And I'm like, you guys, like, do you even have does your business, has it sold anything before? And it hasn't, right? It hasn't sold anything before. And they're trying to do that. And again, more power to you trying to figure out a way. But when you're trying to be like the fifth layer of the middleman, like the broker to the broker to the broker, which these guys, like, they didn't actually know the guy in Dubai, but they knew a guy that knew a guy that knew a guy in Dubai. And so they thought they would get the oil that way and just wind up down this path where it's like, guys, like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we trying to do this?
Yeah. But I will say this, though, if you are in business and you want to be a distributor or a reseller and you're going to try to go that route, number one, make sure you know what the compliance elements are. If you're a small business going to do small business set asides, look into those things that I mentioned earlier, like the non manufacturer rule, which says you have to physically take ownership or possession of the property. How do you do that, right? How do you comply and make sure that it's Buy American compliant or Trade Agreements Act compliant and all these other little things? And so this is very important. And one of the things that you cannot do is just to look at a line item, for example, toilet paper, and think, okay, if the toilet paper cost me this and I could sell it for 10% more, I'll make a profit. Because with the government, there's also a cost of compliance and getting it there and the shipping and the regulations that cost money to comply with. So, and that's something that a lot of people kind of miss out on. But
Right.
anyway,
Well,
I
people
want to
think
shift
drop
gears.
shipping is the way to go. Like, oh, we'll have drop shipping, so we don't have to touch it. None of that
Yeah,
kind of
you
stuff.
got to
Well,
understand the regulations
yeah,
behind that
yeah.
and the restrictions. And I want to have some time to open up for the Q&A towards the end here. And by the way, if you're online with us here, you can use the raise your hand. Here in about 10 minutes, we'll turn to Q&A. But before we do that, Michael, I want to just kind of circle back onto the annual planning side. And something that you mentioned earlier is that you've got a plan, okay, and that might be a certain dollar amount, or hey, maybe your plan is increase your win rate by X number of percentage, right? But then you got to have to come back and say, now, how do you do this? And I think that this is where what I would encourage contractors to do a lot of investigation in would be this: to truly understand the things that Michael said earlier, like who buys what you sell, how are they buying it? For example, are they predominantly purchasing it through a specific contract vehicle, like a GSA schedule contract, which means that now, really, if the bulk of the buying activity is going through the GSA schedules, maybe you need to work to get into a position there or partner up with another company that's there. But the other thing that I think a lot of people miss is qualifying their business for doing business with the government. There may be certain elements that the government wants you to have a special certification to do the job to begin with. But then there's also sometimes people run into roadblocks with qualifying the product because maybe there's a special requirement that the government has to have within this product. And this is why they typically pay more for the product than what is out there and available in the commercial
Mhm.
marketplace. And so when you start to understand these things, and you'll see these in the solicitations, if you're looking at the solicitations, it will require something in particular. For example, if I want to sell training to the government, I have to make sure that the training that I sell is in the right position in the marketplace, which predominantly goes through GSA schedules. And also it has a accreditation to it, because if I was selling, for example, to contracting officers, well, they need to have that accreditation for the acquisition work for certifications, right? So I have to put that to the product. I can't just go out and basically say, hey, I can provide this. I've got the trainer, but there is other elements that apply. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to really look at your plan. And like Michael said earlier, exactly what is it that you need to do to get there from a positioning perspective? You know, do you need to get into a specific government contracting vehicle? And if you can't do that, do you need to find a teaming partner to get yourself in there? And then also look at what the unique qualifications are and start putting a plan together to get those completed so that when the opportunity comes, you're ready for it. And this is where I see a lot of folks that are only watching Sam open up the opportunities. And I saw this a lot when I was a PTAC counselor. You know, they would call me up. They found an opportunity, was all excited, and then quickly deflated because they found out that there was this unique requirement that they didn't have. And they were not going to get it in the window of the solicitation, the proposals being due. So that's one of the tips that I just like to throw out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think from a planning perspective, if you are planning to go after cleared work, you've got to find a way into getting the clearance. So how are you going to do that this year? How are you going to get your facility clearance? those are types of things that go in there as well. If you're wanting to sell a certain product, making sure, you've got all those things checked off that you need to do, those are all good. But I think one that people miss is understanding the size requirements that are out there. The government is not going to award a company who's had no work a $25 million contract. It's rare. It's not it's rare to do that, right? They want you to grow into this work. And from a planning perspective, you can think big and start small. You can focus on, look, our first 3 or 4 contracts need to be under 250K. Then once we have those, we need some 250K to $500,000, then some $500,000 to $1 million. Then we're in the 2 million and the 3 and the 5 million. You need to grow into this, and that requires some planning so that you can target the right opportunities. Because if I go back to the low win rate, I see companies that are brand new. And when I say brand new, I'm saying they just formed their LLC. They don't have any commercial work, and they're responding to RFPs that are $10 and $25 million because they're like, man, that'd be great, right? And we'll undercut the competition. That'd be great. Yeah, but you're not going to win because you don't meet any of the check boxes for something like that. And so understanding from a size perspective, growing into this and how it takes time and not just swinging for the fences on every one of these. If you find an opportunity that's a $25 million opportunity and you're brand new, you need to take that to a partner and say, we found this. We're talking to the contracting officer. We're working on this. We'd like you to prime it. We'd like to sub. Look, we don't care if we only get 5%. Like, we just want to be in the deal, right? So that we can get some past performance. And having that mentality is better than just swinging for the fences blindly, because you're just not going to win a lot of those big things. So that would probably be one of my biggest pieces of advice in the planning stages, is to look at those kind of things. The second one that I would have here is go and look at some of those RFPs that you may not be ready to respond to, and look through the FAR clauses, look through the requirements, because that is a roadmap to the compliance that you need to meet. Because that's a question I get all the time. Well, how would I know that I need to meet all these things? And normally the reason they're finding out is because they're filling out an RFP. It's 2 weeks from being due, and they call me and say, I just found this FAR clause and now I don't know what to do. Like, well, you're not going to be able to respond because there's no way we're going to be compliant in 2 weeks. There's no way. You'll have to get it on the next one. But now that we know that, we've got a checklist. I mean, that's really what a lot of the requirements in an RFP are. That's a checklist for a business owner to say, if we meet all these, we're competitive on price, we have the right past performance, we can win this. And our P win, right? The probability of winning can go from 0 to maybe 75, 80%. Because now we've used the checklist from the RFP to become compliant over the course of the next few months. And now we can actually start chasing these things. So those are a couple of mine from a planning perspective that I think are fairly easy to do. So,
yeah. And that's, one of the things I say all the time now is go out, and even if you're not seeing an active solicitation right now, you can go to sam.gov and go to the filters and set the date to go back the last year.
Yeah.
And see if you can find a solicitation that would be something that you would have been interested in bidding had you have been doing this, and go through it and write a proposal to it and start to work with your Apex Accelerator.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that, again, if you're waiting too late, sometimes you might not be able to get in with the Apex Accelerator to even help you interpret certain FAR clauses and understand what things mean, because the solicitation windows are sometimes very short. And so the more time that you give yourself, and while the historical solicitation might not be 100% representative of the future one, what if you were 90% there, right?
Yeah, it's going to be close.
Yeah,
it's going to be close. There's no doubt about it. There may be a few things that change, like when you get into cybersecurity, some of those things are changing here and there.
Yeah.
And those will be small additions. But for the most part, you're going to see almost a carbon copy. In fact, it's one of the things about contracting officers. A lot of times they will just copy the old one when they go to renew it, and there's stuff in there that's obsolete that you're like, hey, can you remove this because
Yeah.
this no longer matters? You'll see that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a fairly accurate description of what you're going to have to be compliant to.
All right. Well, good stuff, Michael. Let's take some questions for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. So, guys, if you want to ask your question live, please raise your hand. We can unmute your mic and you can ask us live. Otherwise, you could type your question in the Q&A box there, and we do have a couple that has come in. So the first one is, what advice would you offer a small business that's truly a team of one in identifying one agency to pursue for the year? We offer software solutions that any agency can use. We are also WOSB and SDVOSB. The VA seems too obvious, and there are a ton of VOSBs competing for their attention. So do we look at the agencies that most will look over or overlook?
Yeah. Do you want to start with that, or you want me to
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of tips in there because I actually used to be a contracting officer at the VA. One thing I will tell you that if you're a certified SDVOSB, that takes priority other VOSBs. So what I would encourage you to do is to really look at what the agency is using currently in terms of what your competitive product would be. And so what are they doing now? Or is it something that they're not doing yet? That would be more maybe of an innovative approach, because if you're just sitting back watching Sam, if you got an innovative product or solution, you won't see it. You got to do something to get in there, get your foot in the door, maybe set up a small demo, a small pilot project, something small that maybe even at one region they could implement. And if it works really nicely, you could take that out through all the VA. And so if you're SDVOSB, I would definitely say the VA would be one of your top agencies that you're going to want to do business with, because not only do they have the set asides, but they also have the sole source opportunities that they can do there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if we're being honest, most agencies don't care about the veteran status. That's just the way it is. Even with the increase from 3 to 5%, when you look at the VA, that's the one that cares about it. They don't care too much about the VOSB. It's the SDVOSB. I never see opportunities come out VOSB. They're always SDVOSB. So that is definitely the agency to focus on there. And then if you're looking at a secondary agency, I would go back to what I said earlier about looking at your skills. Like, what does your skill set align with? Do you have a background in the medical space? Do you have a background in criminal justice or law enforcement? Do you have a background in the military? What language will you easily speak? And that should help you target that next agency, so that you don't have somebody who's a former law enforcement person trying to sell to the medical community, right? Just because they buy that stuff. Like, leverage your knowledge to pick that other agency. The other piece of advice that I would have for that is look at opportunities initially. If you're a one-woman army, look for opportunities where you can self-perform, where you can do the work initially. Because when you're just starting off and you're a one-person company, you need cash flow. You need to build a cash reserve, right? You want to be like I always think of like in was it the DuckTales or whatever, the guy used to swim in his little pot, thing of gold. Like, you need to build up your gold reserve. And the fastest way to do that is service-based contracts where you're self-performing, because you're keeping all of that money. And after a year or so of that, you can then step into the next phase. And look, I know it sounds like, well, I'm just buying a job. Yeah, but you don't understand. In your job, you may be getting paid $100,000 a year. On your contract, you're probably getting paid $300,000 a year. So you're taking a massive step up. You have control. You can build some cash, so that going in maybe year 2 or 3, then you can look at, okay, now I need to hire, a BD person, and that person's going to help me to actually win contracts where I'm not on contract, and I'm going to work my way out of this nice paying job into a business owner role. But that's a lot of people that start this with no cash reserves make the mistake of saying, well, I've got to staff it and I got to have other people on contract. And ultimately, you're not making a lot of money that way unless you are winning contracts with 5 and 10 FTEs. And can you afford to do that, right? Can you afford to staff that? So I would say self-performing work at the VA and maybe one other agency would be the way I would recommend for this person, because that way you can build the cash reserve. And a year or so from now, you can then make a massive leap in your business. So just my 2 cents on that one.
The one thing that I will add to that is do your best to get a conversation with your end user that would actually be the person that would receive the benefit of your software. And
Mm-hmm.
that might not be the buyer. It probably is not the buyer unless you're selling contract management software. It could be a program manager or a specific person. So if once you know that person, you can actually go to LinkedIn, Google or just YouTube how to use LinkedIn filters, but if you go to the LinkedIn and you just put in the search bar where you usually put somebody's name, put your cursor there, hit enter, it'll pull up filters. You can put in, show me all the people into the Department of Veterans Affairs. And then if you know a specific title of the person, put that title in.
Program. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you'll see a whole list of people. That would be people that you can work to make a direct connection with to talk to them about what they're currently using. If they don't have a solution like what you offer, maybe you could propose a small single user license that they could do on their purchase cards. Simple, not even competition. But maybe if you razzle dazzle them and they want to buy 50,000 licensing, well, that might go out to competition. But guess what? And this is the pre-acquisition work we were talking about. They already know what product they like. Now they just have to formalize the process through a competitive procurement. But
Right.
who do you think is going to win that? Most probably you.
Well, you'll at least give yourself a chance. So.
Yeah.
Next question's a good one there. So, Carroll, what are your thoughts on how many hours per week do you suggest a small business commit to for getting a federal contract?
I think whatever they can afford to commit to. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
a different answer. And here's what the reality of this is that I recommend that people, just to be for consistency purposes, set like an hour a day of time on their calendar that they want to work, or maybe 30 minutes if you only have 30 minutes, but carve out some time for yourself to do this specific work so you're consistent. It's kind of like weightlifting, right? It's like you don't work out once and get like all buff. It's like it's consistency over time. So work consistently. And there's going to be some times where you're going to get very busy and might not even be able to work that 30 minutes, but really try to keep coming back to it so that you're not just completely like you started it, then you got busy, and 6 months down the road, you're restarting it.
I think when you're just starting, almost all your time can be spent, 40 hours in a week can be spent not just on sam.gov, because that's where I think the difference here is in the recommendation. Most people will just spend all of that time on SAM. You should probably be spending about 10 to 20% of your time on SAM. So if you have a few hours a week, maybe you're only spending 15 to 20 minutes of that week on SAM, and the rest of it is reaching out to buyers, like Carroll was saying, whether it's potential program managers or whatever it may be. Spending the time actually reaching out and talking to people is more valuable initially than just getting in there and responding to stuff that you don't have a chance of winning. So that's kind of how I would divide my time. 80% reaching out to people, 10, 20% looking at SAM for active opportunities. So.
All right. And then with the next question posted, I don't know if it's going to show up for everybody, but I posted a link and the question was
about how fast does the government pay?
Yeah, I put a link to the Federal Register there because there was just some updates on February 14th for accelerated payments. So I would suggest taking a look at that because it'll provide a lot of good information. But here's the one thing. The government actually pays very well and timely. But the thing is, you have to submit the invoice in the proper format that they want you to submit it in, and not just use your regular invoicing procedures and send them an invoice in the mail, right? You got to usually do it through an online system. And then what they will typically do is they will check that the product or service that you have provided has been accepted by the program manager. And then once that check is complete, they check the contract to make sure that's what was to be delivered. And they've got your invoice in the system. That's when you're going to get paid in a timely manner. And a lot of people that do government contracting tell me, hey, Carroll, I love this because I do my work and the money just shows up into my account and I don't usually have to chase people down.
Yeah. And I will tack on to that. If you make a mistake on the invoice, they're not necessarily going to follow up with you right away. You're going to have to follow up with them until you get the right place. I was talking earlier with a client that, and telling this story, it was a different client had done work on a project. It was product based and they had multiple invoices. And from the day they started sending the invoice to about, say, invoice 15 out of 20, the price actually came down on the product. So the person doing the invoicing thought they were doing a good thing because they were like, oh, it used to be $2 per product and now it's only $1.90. So I'm going to give the government, that discount. So when they submitted the invoice, it was, say, about $25 off and it was less, and the government wouldn't pay the invoice. They're like, it doesn't match. And they couldn't figure out why. And it took them 90 days of chasing people to figure out why. Because like the last 5 invoices all didn't match the contract. And they're like, we have a problem. Even though it was match in the government's benefit, they still wouldn't pay until they fixed the invoice. So there's little things like that that can cause you to get delays. You mentioned earlier shipping. So we had a client that shipped, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 plumbing parts to a client. And they had the tracking on it. They knew when it arrived at the facility, but they couldn't get the government to pay. And the government was like, well, we don't have it as accepted. And what happened was they had to drive to the facility at some point. They drove to the facility and they said, we know it's here. We know it's here. It's got to be here. And they look around for a couple of hours and they're like, oh, it's over in the back because you didn't label it right. They're like, if you look at the labeling instructions, all 20,000 of those parts were supposed to be labeled individually. And you just have one barcode on the box of 20,000 like little Y connectors or whatever, right? And so they were like, here's your options. You can ship it back to your facility and label it there, and which is, 9 hours away. Or we can do it and you can pay us. And they wound up doing that because it was cheaper, but they lost all their margins. So there's an issue where they wouldn't accept it to pay them on the invoice because it was labeled wrong.
And that's another thing, the cost of compliance and really understanding the product that you're selling and the delivery terms around that. And the marking and packaging is something that's, you got to know. There's a good comment here by a former contracting officer, and going back to the company of one, was saying, if you were a company of one, I would ask you to show me who or how the contract would proceed if you got sick or if something happened to keep you from performing. And that's a very real and fair thing for a contracting officer because if you're a company of one, hey, and you could also get hit by a bus, not to be, worst case scenario, but it's real that the contracting officers are very risk averse. And so that's why as a company of one, you might think about teaming up with other partners as well, so that you can show how you are going to be able to really deliver no matter what. Right. And there's a backup and a contingency plan.
Yeah. I like the fact that this person brought this question up, but I want to interject this into it. They should never ask you that question because you should never position your company as a company of one. You shouldn't. It shouldn't be something that's coming up. Now, there are certain requirements here and there where they'll ask you, like for your hub zone, like about employees. But for the most part, you're not going to see, well, how big is your company? How many employees? This, unless your NAICS code, small business categories based on employees or something like that, they're not going to know any of that kind of stuff. So unless you position yourself, well, it's just me, but you should never do that. When you're an army of one, you should be talking about my team, and your team is not just you. Your team are the partners you work with, the people that help you fulfill things, your coaching team, whoever. You're talking about your team. You're not talking about, well, it's just me, so I'm sorry, or whatever. Like, don't position your company that way, so that this should not come up in a conversation. But good point. If you did highlight that it was just you, they would absolutely ask that kind of thing. So,
All right. Next one is, what are some suggestions for successfully becoming a partner in order to start getting past performance? My efforts have not been fruitful and it's extremely frustrating.
Hmm. It's really common. You want me to handle that one or?
Yeah, go ahead and I'll kind of piggyback.
Sure. I think the biggest challenge for people in this arena is not doing enough homework up front. And when you approach a prime and say, hey, we're a small woman owned, service disabled, whatever, and we know that you guys do this kind of work and we'd sure love to work with you. Even if they have great intentions, the odds are that you're never going to hear back from them because you haven't brought them anything. You haven't added any value to their business at this point. So the best scenario here is go out and learn the customer and filter your opportunities into two categories. When you're just starting off, anything that's below simplified acquisition, so below the 250K, those are things that you will try to prime on your own. If it's over 250K, it's likely going to require past performance. Take those to a prime. Hey, I'm talking to Carroll over at the VA, and Carroll's got this opportunity. It's about a 900,000, a $2 million opportunity. I've got a great relationship with Carroll, but I don't have the past performance. They really want to work with me. Can you guys prime this thing? And I'll do 25, 30% of the work. You can have the rest. I'm serving this up to you on a platter.
Yep.
And you do something like that, and they're like, well, hell yeah. Why wouldn't I do that? And then they want to work with you again and again and again, as long as you can fulfill what you say you can. And so bring something to the prime served up on a silver platter as close to it as you can. Show that you've gathered intelligence on an opportunity and you've got an inside track, even if it's just a little bit. It doesn't have to be the perfect silver platter, but that's always nice. But bring them something that shows you're doing the work, you're bringing them opportunities, and you're going to help them be competitive. And if you do that, you're going to flip these conversations. But most of the time, the conversation is just too vanilla for them. And they're like, man, I've got 100 companies that do what you do.
Yeah.
Why should I pick you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would say, Michael, is just really think about what's in it for them and sell them on what's in it for them and make it more than just your certification. But just as Michael said, like if you bringing them in and asking them to prime and then sub, if it's a small business set aside, you can reverse that and say, hey, we've got this relationship. We know when this is coming out. We've got some intel on the opportunity, and we just need a partner to come in and help us come in as a subcontractor to bring more past performance to the table. But then we get into a whole nother discussion about, will the agency accept the past performance of the subcontractor without it being a joint venture? We have some of those trainings on Govology if you want more on that. But yeah, definitely that would be what I would recommend as well, you know. So that was a great answer. We're
And it
trying to,
applies to the next question.
yeah,
So,
we're
about
trying
the
to get into
USA.
USAID, but they don't do vendor meetings. I have background with the agency, but how do we get in?
Yeah. Using the exact same partner strategy we just talked about is helpful. So starting to learn by actually, there's so much information on their website. There's so much information on their social media. There's information about programs. There's information about who's already selling to them. And those people have information on their websites. So you can do some deep diving on all of that and take it to a prime and get yourself on a team. That's a great way to do it. But I see a lot of times people say, well, these people don't meet with industry. Like they may not be meeting with you, but they meet with industry all the time. So there's something you're either doing or not doing that's causing them not to meet with you. It could be something very simple, but contracting officers, program managers will meet with you to have a capabilities brief. But there's some really simple things. And I'm not saying this person is doing this, but just in general, the turnoffs for contracting officers are the people that reach out and they've not done any homework. They want it served up on a platter for them of, hey, well, I'm a small business. I'm a woman owned. I'm an STVOSB. And, you know, you've got requirements. So you need to do that. Those kind of people create a lot of friction. The other kind of people are the ones that ask 50 questions. So somebody the other day sent me an email and said, I have just two quick questions. I'm like, yeah, but question one has A, B, C through J, and question two has A through M. You got like 50 questions here, right? And I'm exaggerating. But like when somebody sees that, they just delete the email or they respond back with just respond to stuff on Sam, right? That's how you can tell. And this is just my blunt way of saying this is how you can tell you're irritating a contracting officer when they say, just go respond to Sam. Just go look at Sam. Like whatever your response is normally. But if you come in and say, hey, I've just got one or two questions, or hey, I've been doing my homework and could I give you a capabilities brief? I promise you can cut me off at 10 minutes. You can just leave the Zoom, right? If you do those kind of things, these people will meet with you. And if they're pushing back, reach out to the small business reps and say, hey, I've been trying to meet with Carroll and he keeps blowing me off. And hey, this is part of the process. You're supposed to be working with industry, help me, small business rep. And those people will do that. So those are just a couple of tips. So
That's great. And what I might add is that if you're trying to reach the contracting officer, a lot of times contracting officers don't always like to meet up. Why?
yeah.
Because they don't want to feel like they're giving an advantage from one company over the other, especially during a solicitation window. They will not meet up, absolutely. And by the way, the end users won't meet up during that period either. They're not supposed to, at least. But knowing this, the other couple of things I would suggest is you can Google the agency's vendor communication plan. They actually encourage exchange with industry at different times and read what their policy is. The OSDBU representative might be another person that's, if you're saying, hey, here's what we do. And especially if you're like a small business that maybe just want a small opportunity under 25K that they're never going to publicize, maybe you're saying, hey, part of us being able to transact business would be to have a meeting with the end user. Maybe they can help you get in, but also go back to what we said earlier about LinkedIn and go and try to connect directly with some of the end users. Now, not everybody's going to want to connect with you, but you know what? If you're targeting an agency, there's probably that exact type of person multiplied by 100 all across the government, right? So
Right.
just keep trying, because if you can get in with one and kind of get your sales going, then you can kind of use that to leverage success in other areas. That might be your way in.
No, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
next one is about what advice do you have for an 8A company that had a few contractors, I assume contracts, but now they're starting over. I don't know if they can add some clarity to that question because I'm not
Yeah, that would be
sure
good.
exactly on that. So that was the next one on here. I'm just going to move that one. This next person, Natasha here, they have two areas they would like to offer services: web and software development and design and marketing, PR and content creation. Yeah, I do think they're too far apart. You look at those things, they could almost all be like web development, software development, design, marketing, PR, content creation. Those are all different niches. I would pick one of those, especially if you are one person company. I'd pick one of those, and that'd be the thing that I would look at. And how I would pick it is which one of those has the greatest opportunity to spill over into the others, and lead that as your flagship, and then use the others as your secondary services. So let's say you want a web development contract for a client, come back after 3 months, 4 months, and say, hey, let me do a capabilities brief with you. Because while I've been working on your website, I noticed some marketing things and some PR or some content stuff that we could help you with. And you probably don't even know we do that. But start with your flagship, sell that, and then let that be the thing that gets you into the other areas of the agency. So,
Yep. Next question is, there was something about how quickly should a small business get their ISO certification? And a simple answer, what I would say to that is, if it is something that's required by the agency that you want to do business with, as soon as you can. So
yeah, that's
if it's
really
not required, maybe you don't even need to worry about it so much.
absolutely. Absolutely. Next question. Hi, I'm a single member LLC cleaning company with 2 employees. I have about 13 clients, but they are houses. I'm looking to land my first commercial government contract. also DBE certified. I would like some guidance on where to begin to start bidding. So, in a situation like this, I don't know how you feel about it, Carroll, but you're likely going to look in your backyard for this, given the size you are, unless you have the ability to staff in other areas. So if I was pulling a report on this, I would pull either a SAM or a USA spending report and see who in my geographic region, if that's where I'm going to zero in on,
Yeah.
who's buying what I'm selling. And that's how I would build my initial target list on that. And you may build it on saying, well, between me and my two employees, we can serve a 50-mile radius, 100-mile radius. I'd zero in on that initially, and that's probably be where I'd start. So if you have the ability to sell outside of that, then you can look at, again, based on your knowledge of agencies or your background, like you could probably sell this to anybody, but it really is, can you scale it or do you need to be local? That's really a big question for something like this. I would not recommend that for your first contract, you win something that is 12 states over, like Carroll was talking about earlier, or winning a contract on the other side of the country as your first major contract would probably end in disaster. So even if you could service a larger area, focusing locally so you can go through the motions and learn how to service a government contract. And then from there, you can look at saying, okay, well, we can branch out, we can serve any state. Now let's look for the opportunities in our wheelhouse and focus on that, but focus locally first. So,
Yeah. One of the things that I'll mention too is that I'm with Michael on this one, and some of your state and local agencies might be good. One of the things that I do know in a lot of the government agencies, they use a lot of special programs, like Ability One contractors, for example. It's nonprofits that employ people with disabilities. They do a lot of janitorial services contracts. So that might be like where you're going to run up against a wall there. So maybe the local contracting might be better. But with the fact that you're a DBE certified firm, what I would have you take a look at is go to Google and Google SBA table of small business size standards. Look at the construction NAICS codes because there's a specific NAICS code for cleaning construction projects, after they get done with their work. We're in the midst of an infrastructure bill that's like bonkers spending. So I think that you could probably get a lot of commercial contracts with big primes that are doing a lot of the construction work around, and you could come in and get some of those specific cleaning contracts with your DBE certification. And ultimately, if you go for your 8A certification, a lot of the big prime also have subcontracting goals for 8A and various WSB and other socioeconomic set asides.
great example there. Really good advice, Carol. The next one from Rachel is, how do you find out about simple acquisitions since they are usually not posted? You find out by talking to contracting officers, program managers, because if it is under simplified acquisition, especially if it's under micro purchase, which could be simply under 50K, not just 10K. Most people think there's only a 10K micro purchase threshold. There's actually a 50K threshold as well. If it's under one of those, you're likely going to see it in SAM as a notice to award because it's a done deal. It's already been awarded. And so you have to be talking to these people in what Carol was talking about earlier, all those pre-acquisition activities where you're meeting and getting to know your customer. That's the way you're going to do it. And I'll go back to, if you pull a SAM report, you can pull it in the SAM database, you can pull it in USA Spending, you can very quickly identify who's buying what you sell. If you're doing it in the SAM database, you will actually be able to filter it based on the contracting officers and see which contracting officers are doing that. And it will usually be by their first and last name. Certain agencies like Health and Human Services, State Department, usually do first initial last name, but you'll usually be able to find it right down to the contracting officer name and email address in those. And now you know who to reach out to and talk to.
All right.
We're getting
We'll
through.
take a few. We'll take a few more, and then we'll close it down. And then what I'd like to encourage everybody to do, by the way, is we've got a great LinkedIn group called Gavology Nation, and the easiest way to get there, Elena or Darren, if you'll put that in the chat for me, it's gavology.com/nation. And so we have a lot of folks. Michael and I are there, and so if you want to post a question, that's a good place. We've got about close to 2,000 folks now in Govology Nation. So I encourage you guys to go to govology.com/nation. That'll jump you right over into the LinkedIn group and just request access there. So let's take a couple more and then we'll kind of have to wrap it up.
Yeah, there's a couple of easy
And I
ones here.
appreciate your extra time today, Michael.
You betcha, man. I don't always have it, but today I did.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a couple of easy ones here. For smaller entities, are product or service contracts better? I love service contracts because if you're small and you're self-performing, you get to keep all the money. And so you can grow much faster on the service side like that than you can on the product side, where you're supplying a product, you've got product costs, shipping, you've got all these things that you have to deal with. And that is just a lot more work. That's my opinion. Carroll, I don't know what your thoughts are on that one.
I think I'm with you on that one too, because what you have to take into account is on the product side, for example, if you're not manufacturing the product and you're selling somebody else's product, which a lot of times happens, well, first off, you're probably not the exclusive supplier. The people who are selling in bulk and volume is going to get a better discounted rate than you are going to get. So at the end of the day, if your margin is like 10%, again, you got to factor in the cost of compliance and your time of going back and forth. I mean, your margins on some of these products are oftentimes very small. So you got to sell like a ton of them really to make any kind of good profit, if there's any profit to be made at the end of it.
Oh, totally agree. Let's see.
Let's do two more.
Let's do two more. Okay,
I'll
so
let you pick.
let's do an easy one. Can an entity win multiple up to 3 to 5 contracts within a calendar year? There's no limit on the amount of contracts you can win at any given point. I've got brand new clients that have 25 contracts. So there's no limit. That was an easy one. You pick the next one.
Let's see this last one here. It says, do you have any suggestions for cold calling, referencing the 80% versus 20% in SAM?
Do you want that one or you want me to get it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what they mean by the 20% versus 80%.
I think earlier I referenced how, and we talk about this all the time, how SAM only has about 20% of the opportunities and the other 80% often never make it to SAM because they're going contract vehicle or something like that.
Or their micro purchase.
Yeah, or micro purchase, things like that. So my best suggestion for cold calling is to actually do a little bit of research before you pick up the phone. It takes 5-10 minutes to look and see, is the person, number one, that you're calling, does that person even buy what you sell, right? Do they buy what you sell? And if they don't buy what you sell, don't call them. That's a pretty easy rule. But making sure you've done even a little research, you've maybe Googled their forecast, you've taken a look at that, you've looked at a few of the opportunities that person has posted, and you go into it having some research so that you can ask a specific question.
Yeah. That's
where a lot of people go wrong, is they go in and say, hey, Carroll, my name is Mike Lejeune. I sell these coaching services. And, man, if you guys buy this kind of stuff, we'd sure love to sell it to you. Oh, by the way, I'm a service disabled veteran and you guys are the VA. So, you guys support veterans. Like, I hear calls that are like that, or even less, like where they're like, hey, I'm with ABC company and we sell this sort of widgets. And then it's almost silence, right? Like, where's the specific ask for, hey, Carroll, doing my research and I noticed that you had this RFI that you guys canceled, or you guys had this out there. I was wondering if I could still respond to that. And hey, where are you guys at in the process with this? This RFI was, 3 months ago. Are you guys moving forward with that? Something simple like that.
Yeah.
A direct question you can ask somebody, because they really appreciate when you ask a very specific, simple question that they can answer. Hey, if you're not moving forward with this, do you have any opportunities that are not on the forecast that I should maybe know about? Maybe some smaller things. Maybe you've got a $50,000 training budget. You don't know how you're going to spend before the end of Q4, and we could help you with that. Do you have something like that? I wouldn't ask all the questions I just threw out there. I'd probably pick one or two, and you ask some of those very specific things that show you're not looking for a handout, because 80% of their phone calls are looking for a handout, and they're very, very generic, and it's very frustrating. Like I talked to a bunch of contracting officers, And the consensus is they get on average between 200 and 250 emails a day and another anywhere from 25 to 50 phone calls a day. That's a lot to juggle. So you've got to be specific. You've got to make it short and sweet and not waste their time. Because if you look or smell like all the people that are wasting their time, they either just don't respond or they give you the frustrating response of just go look at Sam. We post everything on Sam.
Yeah. And that's the truth. That's the truth, Michael. I mean, I've been there. Uh, I've given that answer before, but the thing is, it's just that the contracting officers don't have time to explain every facet of doing business with them to
Right.
you, right? And a lot of people that are in these roles that's where they post their opportunities to Sam, and that's where you can find them. But you also, they're not going to sit there and explain to you, well, what do you do? Oh, yeah, we buy that off of GSA, and here's how you get a GSA contract and all of this. So that's why we've got this education. That's why we do what we're doing on this call today to help you guys get a little bit of knowledge there so that you can understand the process. And what you said, Michael, was hit the nail on the head, is that when you done all of the homework that's available out there, so you've got your education, you've researched on your website, you've done a little bit of market research, which we have training to teach you how to do that too. You've worked with your Apex Accelerator. I know, like one Ozdebu out in Portland that we worked with, and every time a company would come to her, she'd be like, don't talk to me until you've already talked to your then PTAC. Now it's Apex Accelerator, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
because they don't want to waste time, because they don't have a lot of time and they have other work that they need to do. So that's the common answer that you're going to get. But then when you can really streamline a question, and I like what you said, Michael, just make a simple question, and that might open the door because it's something that doesn't relate, that doesn't end with the answer. Just watch sam.gov. So if you know that you mostly sell things that are not going to hit SAM because your average sale would be like $5,000, which would typically go under micro purchase, well, you probably don't even want to reach out to the contracting officer anyway, because that could be done on the department level with the purchase card, right?
Right.
So maybe you do that work like we talked about a couple of times. Go on to LinkedIn, put the title of the person that you want to touch base with, maybe have a couple of questions to ask them, or however you feel that you can get an easy way in to open up a conversation with them, right? And so, and then if you do get the opportunity to go in there, don't go in there just with guns a-blazing trying to
Yeah.
promote your product.
Yeah.
Ask questions about, like, what are you guys doing right now in this area, and what are your challenges or pain points? Do you buy this off of a contract vehicle, or do you? So learn, and then once you learn, there can be the opportunity for you to talk and promote your product or whatever you do. But now when you do that having already understanding what they're telling you. And then either you find that there's a fit where now what you offer can help them, or you might find that, oh, okay, well, I see, I probably shouldn't even make this pitch because they just told me that predominantly they have to go to GSA to buy this product. And so my path now would be to go and research the GSA schedules to see if this is something that we do and get into that market. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, good stuff, man. And appreciate all the questions from everybody.
yeah,
If we had time, we'd answer every single one of them, but I know we don't. And I know a lot of people are headed out for the day, so they're going to do their thing. But we thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you for your questions, and I think you'll be able to capture them. And we respond to those?
yep.
Yeah, so
Yep.
we'll get them answered. So.
And we do this once a month, guys. So, jump back on next time and join us. So thank you, Michael, for the extra time again today. And thank you all for being here. And we look forward to seeing you guys again next month.
We appreciate you. See you next time.
All right. Take care.